Hello, fellow teachers, and welcome to Teaching with Power. I'm Ben Wilcox, and I want to thank you for letting me be a part of your scripture study or your lesson prep this week. My goal is to help you to study or teach the scriptures with more relevancy and power. And this week, just 2 chapters. Wow! Alma chapters 30 and 31. But boy, I am glad that they're giving us an entire week for just these 2, because they are packed with powerful principles. Principles that are very, very relevant to our day. And I'm excited that we get the chance to really dig into these wonderful chapters. And remember, teachers, if you're interested in getting access to the materials that I put together for teachers to help reduce your preparation time, increase your confidence in the classroom, and help you to create edifying classroom experiences, just go to teachingwithpower.com and you're going to find links to those resources. If you're ready, grab your scriptures and your marking pencils. It's time to dig deep. For an object this week, I would grab a copy of some kind of how-to book. Some of you might have heard of the For Dummies series of books, which are basically how-to manuals for those who feel that they have no background or knowledge in that particular skill. I once bought a Cooking for Dummies book, and I felt that it did help me to develop some basic skills in that area. Well, I would just place 1 or 2 of those kinds of books up at the front of the class, and those would be available at your local library if you need one. And then, for an icebreaker, I'd maybe hold up one of those books and ask them if they had ever used a how-to book in the past to learn something. What was it, and how did it help them? Or nowadays, there's another source for how-tos that's much more prevalent and accessible, right here on YouTube. I can't tell you how many times that I've needed to repair something, figure something out, or I just wanted to learn a new hobby or a skill. And YouTube came through for me, gave me the help and instruction that I needed. Or you could even just Google a how-to question. Well, just for fun here, I did some research, and here are some of the top how-to searches on Google. What do you think some of them might be? Take a guess and see if it makes the list. These apparently are the things that people most want to know how to do. And the number 1 most popular how-to question on Google is, interestingly, how to tie a tie. I guess there must be a lot of deacons on Google. Personally, I can't stand ties. From the scriptures, it seems to suggest that we're going to wear robes in the eternities. Kind of wish that we could just start that now. But anyway, here is a list of some other popular how-to searches on the internet. How to lose weight, how to draw, how to make money, how to make pancakes. Interestingly, money and pancakes, the 2 most desired human ambitions. How to write a cover letter, how to make French toast. Well, breakfast foods make another appearance on the list. Well, this week in Alma chapter 30, we're going to examine 2 spiritual how-tos. One from the adversary's perspective and one from the Lord's. A man named Korihor is going to speak for Satan here, and Alma is going to speak on behalf of the Lord. Their topics? Korihor is going to teach us how to shake faith in 6 easy steps. And then Alma is going to teach us how to defend or maintain our faith in 6 easy steps. Both how-tos are going to provide us with insight and strength. And we're going to start with Korihor so that we can end on a positive note. Now, I can perhaps hear you murmuring to yourself, but why on earth would I want to study Korihor's side of things? Why would I want to learn how to destroy somebody's faith? Good question. Well, is there any wisdom in examining the techniques and the tools of the devil? I think so. The more that we understand how he works, the less likely we are to be deceived by him. Maybe some of you have read C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters, where the book is told from the perspective of a senior devil training an apprentice devil on how to tempt people. And this is done in a unique and entertaining way. That book has helped me to avoid and combat temptation and to know what to expect. It's very good to understand our enemies and how they work. So some context, though. After a period of peace among the Nephites, one day Korihor comes walking into Zarahemla, and the Book of Mormon labels him as an antichrist. What's an antichrist? It's someone who seeks to draw your faith away from Christ. Now, we discussed that term back in Jacob 7, where we were introduced to Sherem, the first antichrist of the Book of Mormon. I would deem Korihor as the ultimate antichrist, the toughest and most skilled of them all. But the term antichrist is a bit of a tough one for us because it sounds so diabolical and so evil. We sometimes have trouble relating to it. Conjures up images of cult leaders or devil worship or the criminally insane. But you might remember that back in Jacob, I like to use a different term to describe these people. Faith shakers. People and things that seek to shake us from the faith. Korihor is an expert faith shaker. But fortunately, Alma is an expert at dealing with faith shakers. In the Book of Mormon, he gets the privilege of dealing with 3 out of the 4, which is perhaps somewhat fitting because at one point in his life, Alma was a bit of a faith shaker himself, wasn't he? Now let's examine how Korihor seeks to shake faith. Hopefully, that will better prepare us to recognize these methods when the adversary tries them out on us, which he most certainly will. It's possible that we're going to run up against actual individuals who try these things on us, or will encounter things on social media or the internet. But more often than not, these tactics are likely to be used directly by the adversary within our own minds and hearts. And instead of reading through this chapter verse by verse, hopefully your students have already done that in their personal study. So what we're going to do is highlight the phrases that I feel demonstrate a tactic that Korihor is using, and then invite my students to ponder how they would label that tactic. Or we'll decide those terms as a class. But I would give my students a handout, a place where they could write these steps down to more easily highlight them. So here we go. Step 1. What pattern do you see in the following phrases found all throughout Korihor's attack? Verse 13, foolish and vain hope. Such foolish things. In verse 14, these things which ye call prophecies. You can almost hear the sarcasm in his voice, can't you? And then he talks about foolish traditions. Verse 16, it is the effect of a frenzied mind. And this derangement of your minds comes because of the traditions of your fathers, which lead you away into a belief of things which are not so. Modern term for what Korihor is describing here would be brainwashing. The only reason you church members believe what you do is because you've been brainwashed. It's a psychological problem. You must be insane to believe such nonsensical things. Something's wrong with your brains. By the way, I don't think really that's much of an argument when you think about it. It's just a lazy way of dismissing the beliefs and views of others. We could say the same thing about anybody in any religion or non-religion, culture, political persuasion. The only reason you believe is because you've been brainwashed by your environment, your upbringing. In verse 23, foolish traditions, foolish ordinances and performances. 27, foolish traditions. 28, their dreams and whims and their visions and their pretended mysteries. In verse 31, Korihor rises up in great swelling words before Alma, and instead of using the word foolish in this verse, he calls them silly traditions. Now, what's the tactic here? Step 1 in destroying people's faith is to mock them. This is one of the most effective and popular means faith shakers use to tear down faith. Because really, that's all they've got, usually. I mean, there's no proof against what we believe, and we don't claim to have proof for the things that we believe, because that's not faith. The basis of faith is believing things that we hope for that are not seen, which are true. But faith shakers try to make the things we believe look silly or foolish. And that often works because you can make anyone or anything look silly, no matter how sacred or true it is, just by the way that you talk about it. Typically, reasonable, rational, and respectful conversation just doesn't cut it when you're trying to shake faith. I've noticed that some of the most popular faith shakers of our day just happen to also be really funny people, talented comedians, as well as being very smart. Some examples that come to my mind, the guys who wrote the Book of Mormon musical, Ricky Gervais, Bill Maher come to mind. Strongly anti-faith individuals, but very skilled and humorous entertainers. Do you remember the Great and Spacious Building? What was their activity of choice? Mocking the people under the tree. They hoped to shame us into giving up our faith. There's nothing better to do in the Great and Spacious Building, apparently, than to point fingers of scorn at those who believe. That's step one. Mock them. Step number two, there's something that Korihor brings up over and over again in his railings. See if you can figure it out by looking at what's marked here. He's constantly harping on the foolish traditions of the fathers. That phrase appears in verses 14, 16, 23, 27, 28, and 31. And in verse 23, he speaks about performances laid down by ancient priests. And in verse 24, he refers to ancient prophecies. I would call step number two, antiquate them. Faith shakers love to appear progressive, modern, and new. So they deride the past, and they try to make time-honored truths and foundational principles look old-fashioned, backwater, obsolete. Maybe they mock church leadership, who are typically older individuals, ancient priests. And they say things like, "How can you let your life be run by a bunch of old men in Salt Lake? They don't understand you. They don't understand contemporary issues. They're old. They're not with the times." My favorite response to the accusation, Jeffrey R. Holland's testimony of the prophets in the October 2006 General Conference. "As the least of those who have been sustained by you to witness the guidance of this church firsthand, I say with all the fervor of my soul that never in my personal or professional life have I ever associated with any group who are so in touch, who know so profoundly the issues facing us, who look so deeply into the old, stay so open to the new, and weigh so carefully, thoughtfully, and prayerfully everything in between. I testify that the grasp this body of men and women have of moral and societal issues exceeds that of any think tank or brain trust of comparable endeavor of which I know anywhere on the earth. I bear personal witness of how thoroughly good they are, of how hard they work, and how humbly they live. It is no trivial matter for this church to declare to the world prophecy, seership, and revelation, but we do declare it." As a teacher, you might even consider showing that little clip from Elder Holland's talk. The step number 3 from the book of Faith Shaking. Take a look at these phrases. Verse 13, bound down, and why do ye yoke yourselves? Verse 23, I do not teach this people to bind themselves down under foolish ordinances and performances. Verse 24, ye say this people is a free people. Behold, I say they are in bondage. And in 27, ye keep them down, even as it were in bondage, that ye may glut yourselves with the labors of their hands, that they durst not look up with boldness, and that they durst not enjoy their rights and privileges. What's the tactic there? What is Korihor suggesting about the gospel, about faith, about belief. Make their obedience seem like bondage. Plant in their minds the idea that following proven rules of effective behavior is restrictive and limits their freedom rather than magnifying it. Believers have a set of rules that they call commandments. Make them feel like they're being controlled rather than guided and blessed by them. Well, faith shakers will almost always suggest that commandments, rules, counsels, and standards are a threat to freedom and therefore should be rebelled against. That tactic is pretty easy to employ because commandments do restrict the will and the desires of the natural man. That part of us that wants what it wants right now without any thought for the future. Live in the moment. Do what feels good. It's pretty easy to make commandments seem restricting. However, the restriction in the short term produces greater freedom in the long. The restriction of the appetite now leads to freedom from health problems and addiction. The restriction of lust now leads to the freedom of loving long-term relationships and sexual health. The restriction of anger and temper now leads to freedom from regret and loss of trust. God wants willing obedience. So where's the bondage if it's willing? In rock climbing, there's rules that you follow in order to stay safe. Double check your knots. Make sure your harness is tight. Assure that your belay device is rigged correctly. Make 3 points of contact for each move. Move quickly and deliberately through the crux. I would call these commandments of rock climbing. Do I feel bound by them? Controlled by them? I can't enjoy the experience of climbing because I have to follow them? I follow those things willingly. They keep me safe. If I chose not to follow them, I could fall. I could get hurt. I could die. Same thing is true spiritually of gospel commandments. There's rules to navigating mortality successfully and safely. We could ignore them, but we do so at our own peril. Step number 4. Korihor tells them these commandments are, verse 23, laid down by ancient priests to usurp power and authority over them, to keep them in ignorance, that they might not lift up their heads, but be brought down according to thy words. Verse 27, thus ye lead away this people after the foolish tradition of your fathers, and according to your own desires. 28, they durst not make use of that which is their own, lest they should offend their priests, who do yoke them according to their desires. Verse 31, did revile against the priests and teachers, accusing them of leading away the people. Do you notice the tactic there? What's his argument against the authority of the church? I call this tactic inventing a power struggle. The adversary knows that believers inevitably have leaders, parents, and teachers that endeavor to teach them commandments and encourage them to live and follow them. Satan tries to convince them that these people are motivated by a desire to control rather than to help. As a parent, I have rules and expectations for my children. Is my motivation the desire to control them? Am I drunk with power? Do I get some kind of pleasure in exercising my authority over them? No. I suppose that it's possible that some parents might, but it really doesn't take into account all the sacrifices that parents make for children, all of their efforts to support and love and help them. Do parents really give all of that so that they can revel in telling their kids what to do? I don't think so. Same with church leaders. I just don't see the great motivation for church leaders to try to control us. What benefit does it bring them? Local church leaders sacrifice an incredible amount of time serving in their callings, and they receive no financial gain from it. Global church leaders are given a living allowance, but in return, work incredibly hard during the years where most people their age are enjoying rest and retirement. Many of them gave up highly lucrative careers in order to serve in the church. And on top of that, when you hear them speak in general conference, do you get the sense that they're trying to control you? That they have some ulterior motive? I guess that you'd have to decide that for yourself. And I can only speak for me. But I just don't see it. Their sincerity, their love, their commitment to their faith is evident in the way that they speak and the spirit that they bring. Step number 5. I point to 2 specific verses here, 27 and 31. And here Korihor suggests that Alma teaches the gospel so that he can glut himself on the labors of the people. He's accusing Alma of teaching for money. That, of course, is an outright lie. Many of the other things that Korihor is teaching here, we could say are his opinion. But this statement is different. It's a lie. The tactic here that faith shakers use often is to subtly and at the right moment slip in a lie, but to be very careful to also cushion it with half-truths and exaggerations so that it will be less detectable. My experience with anti-church literature follows that same pattern. Usually, their arguments are going to begin with a statement of truth, albeit presented in the worst possible light. I mean, honestly, you can make anything look bad just in the way that you talk about it. I can make Disneyland seem like a terrible place just in the words and the tone that I use to talk about it. But often, under the half-truths and the hyperbole, faith shakers are going to slip in outright lies, something that simply is not true. And those less informed in the gospel or whose testimonies are vulnerable because of inexperience can't always detect them. Satan is referred to as the father of lies. He's an expert in employing them. Step number 6, finally, take a look at the following verses. Verse 13. No man can know of anything which is to come. 15. Ye cannot know of things which ye do not see. 17. There shall be no atonement. Also in 17. Whatsoever a man does, it was no crime. 18. When a man is dead, that is the end thereof. 26. Ye do not know that there shall be a Christ. 28. Speaks about God, a being who never has been seen or known, never was, and never will be. What's the tactic? Undercut their doctrine. Blatantly and directly challenge their beliefs. I call these statements of Korihor the articles of no faith. And because it's difficult for the enemies of the gospel to criticize or attack our actions or our morals, I mean, who can argue against honesty, sacrifice, family, service? So what are they usually going to go after? Our doctrine. The things that we believe about God, about our eternal destiny. So Korihor, one by one, denies that these things are real. His opening salvo is that you cannot know of things which you do not see. And this continues to be the major criticism people of faith first hear in our post-scientific revolution world. Something can only be true if it is observable. And what those critics fail to recognize is that that is exactly what faith is. It's believing things that are not seen. We believe that there's another way of discovering truth. We don't deny that empirical evidence and scientific observation are ways to obtain truth. They are. And we can accept that. But we also believe that we can discover truth through revelation from a loving God by the power of His Spirit. And that's not observable in the way of the world. So when they attack us for not being able to provide empirical evidence for the existence of God or the Spirit or heaven or an afterlife, we say, you know what, you're right. We can't. We make no claim that we can. But that is the basis of faith. Don't condemn us for something that we're not claiming. The language of faith is not the same as the language of science. It was never intended to be. Korihor says that there's no atonement. Each of the antichrists in the Book of Mormon have a little bit of a different approach to salvation. Believer says that we're saved by the grace and mercy of Christ. But what about antichrists? Sharam says that we're saved by our works. In his case, the law of Moses. Nahor says that everybody's saved, no matter what. Korihor says, saved from what? There's nothing to be saved from. When we die, that's it. And then Zoram says that we are saved and you are not. So to Satan, it doesn't really matter what false doctrine you prescribe to, as long as it is anti-Christ. If he can't get you with one false philosophy, another will do just as well, as long as it draws you away from relying on the Savior. And I can think of examples of every single one of those philosophies in the world today. Some secular, some religious. Each are effective in their own way with their own specific audiences. So what's Korihor's alternative to salvation through Christ? Here's a philosophy that's alive and well in our world. Verse 18. He says that every man fared in this life according to the management of the creature. Therefore every man prospered according to his genius, and that every man conquered according to his strength. Have you noticed that philosophy in our world? It's the law of the survival of the fittest, social Darwinism, the law of the jungle approach to life. Forget service, forget sacrifice, forget fairness and charity. Make all of your decisions in life based on how they benefit you. Self-fulfillment through selfishness. The gospel, on the other hand, has us look after our brother. And when we're in the service of our fellow beings, we're only in the service of God. The anti-doctrine of Korihor is cutthroat. The doctrine of God is giving. Do you see how those tactics work? To liken the scriptures here, have you ever had any experience with any of these tactics? Has the adversary ever tried them on you? And hopefully by reading this story, we've exposed some of Satan's diabolical designs. When the faith shakers and Korihors enter our lives, hopefully we can recognize the tactics. Satan's methods really haven't changed much for millennia. So let's be aware of them and prepared for them. Now that's only half of the story here. We're going to turn our attention to Alma now. Watch a master at work as he's going to dismantle Korihor's arguments against faith. And we're going to label these steps how to defend or maintain your faith in 6 easy steps. There's a handout to go with this one as well for your students to fill out. For a quick icebreaker here, I like to show my students the following picture of the 7 ancient wonders of the world, with just one of them covered up. What were the 7 ancient wonders of the world? See if your students can name any of them. We've got the Lighthouse of Alexandria, the Mausoleum at Halicarnassus, the Colossus of Rhodes, the statue of Zeus at Olympia, the Temple of Artemis, the Hanging Gardens of Babylon. And then there's one more. And the last one holds a special place on that list because it's the only wonder of the ancient world that's still standing. All of the rest have been reduced to rubble and ruin. But this wonder can still be visited today. What's even more amazing is that this wonder is the oldest of the ancient wonders. By far, by thousands of years even. Can anybody name that last wonder? The answer is the pyramids. The pyramids at Giza in Egypt. They're still standing nearly 5,000 years later. All the others are basically gone, but the pyramids remain. Why is that? Because the pyramid, architecturally speaking, is among the strongest of structures that can be built. That particular design is far better equipped to withstand earthquakes, hurricanes, and even the ravages of erosion and time. Pyramids are basically man-made mountains that can't be toppled or collapsed. Egypt isn't the only place in the world where we see the persisting nature of pyramids. Ancient pyramids can also be found in Central America and in Asia as well. It's a design that lasts. I love the pyramid as a symbol of faith. We want to have pyramid faith, a faith that is unshakable, untoppleable, and unerodable. There are many Korahorian forces out there in the world that are seeking to destroy and tear down our faith. But if we can build a pyramid of faith, and it can stand for eternity, Alma is going to show us how. And the symbol of the pyramid is going to come back and help us to understand something about faith a little later in the lesson. So step one. First step actually doesn't come from Alma, but from the people of Ammon, or the anti-Nephi Lehis, in verses 20 and 21. Look at how they respond to Korahor's attacks on their faith. But behold, they were more wise than many of the Nephites, for they took him and bound him and carried him before Ammon, who was a high priest over that people. And it came to pass that he caused that he should be carried out of the land. And he came over into the land of Gideon and began to preach unto them also. And here he did not have much success, for he was taken and bound and carried before the high priest and also the chief judge over the land. Now, what does that teach us about dealing with faith shakers? Maybe one of the best ways to deal with them is to just walk away, or to not engage with them in the first place. We don't have to seek out or even put up with blatant attacks on what we believe. If somebody has a legitimate question or a curiosity or a doubt, there's no reason to run away from it, and there are times to stand up for what we believe. But when we can tell the principal motive behind another's questions or conversation is just to try and tear down what we believe, why entertain it? Why go seeking it out? Maybe it would be more wise for us to cast it out or simply walk away. We don't need to feel obligated to answer every accusation that's hurled at us. As a full-time missionary, if I ever sensed that somebody was just hoping to argue with me, put down my beliefs, shake my faith, I would simply say that our purpose as missionaries was not to argue about religion, but to invite. And then I'd just hand them an invitation card with the address to the church and hope that they would come and worship with us sometime. I found that to be a very effective way of dealing with those that were hostile to our missionary work. Step number 2, 32 through 34. A quick hint on this one. This one pairs up with Korahor's tactics of subtly slipping in lies in his argument. What does Alma do here in response to that? Now Alma said unto him, Thou knowest that we do not glut ourselves upon the labors of this people. For behold, I have labored, even from the commencement of the reign of the judges until now, with mine own hands for my support, notwithstanding my many travels round about the land, to declare the word of God unto my people. And notwithstanding the many labors which I have performed in the church, I have never received so much as even one senine for my labor. Neither has any of my brethren, save it were in the judgment seat. And then we have received only according to law for our time. And now, if we do not receive anything for our labors in the church, what doth it profit us to labor in the church, save it were to declare the truth, that we may have rejoicings in the joy of our brethren? Now what's Alma doing here? He's correcting Korahor's lie with the truth. We should be able and ready to do the same. Don't let them get away with lies. Of course, in order to correct them with the truth, we've got to know the truth ourselves first. Hopefully we've prepared ourselves with study, pondering, and prayer, in order to be able to do so. So let's know our doctrine. Well, know the facts. Study out in our minds the way that we might answer specific questions that we may be asked about our beliefs. Step number 3. The one in verse 35 is a bit more subtle, but I like to focus on the final phrase in that verse. And now, believest thou that we deceive this people that causes such joy in their hearts? I love this one. Korihor is suggesting that the people are miserable, that they're being controlled by these leaders and are bound down and living lives of quiet desperation and drudgery. And Alma's like, what are you talking about? Look around you, Korihor. These people are happy. Why are you trying to steal their joy? The step here is not to let them manipulate you. Refuse manipulation. Faith shakers will often try to tell you how you feel about something. You can't do anything. Your church runs your life. I can't believe your church asks you to pay 10% of your income. On and on and on. They want to dictate how you feel about things. Don't stand for it. Correct them. Actually, I love my faith. I love my church. My faith brings me joy. I'm grateful to have the restored gospel in my life. I'm grateful for the guidance of commandments and the inspiring words and the counsels of living prophets. We get to decide how we feel, and we should express that boldly. Gospel's a gospel of joy. Righteousness always was happiness. And that's something that we can testify of that has no counter-argument. Step number 4, verse 39. What's Alma doing here? Now Alma said unto him, Will ye deny again that there is a God, and also deny the Christ? For behold, I say unto you, I know there is a God, and also that Christ shall come. Emphasis on the last sentence there. What's the step? I know there is a God, and that Christ will come. What's he doing there? He's bearing testimony. Alma answers Korihor with pure testimony. Sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Counteract their unfaith with real faith. Short, straightforward, sincere statements of belief are powerful tools in fending off attacks. Really hard to argue with testimony. There's a point where we may simply have to say, I believe that God lives. I believe that Jesus Christ is the Redeemer of mankind. I believe that Joseph Smith is a prophet of God. I believe that the Book of Mormon is true. People can't deny your faith. They may attack it. They may mock it. They may question it. But they can't tell you that you don't have a testimony. That comfortably sits within our power. Now, the usual counterattack to testimony is, how do you know these things? They may say something like, what evidence do you have for your so-called belief? Prove to me that you know. Remember Korihor's article of no faith. You cannot know of things which you do not see. It's all about evidence, right? Now, that's why I love step number 5. Look at what Alma does in verse 40. And now what evidence have ye that there is no God, or that Christ cometh not? I say unto you that ye have not, save it be your word only. It's like he says, okay, Korihor, since it's all about evidence here, what's your evidence? What evidence do you have that there is no God? Give me your proof. And I would call this step, put them on the defensive. Don't let them back you into a corner. You may not have all the answers, but neither do they. Ask them to give you their evidence, and they'll probably have their own reasons for believing what they do. But you push those a little further, and you'll find that it's still opinion. It's just their word only. It's belief, not proof. This places you back firmly on equal ground. The faith shakers that do this kind of thing are kind of like the political candidate who runs the smear campaign against their opponent, offers up argument after argument for why the opponent is bad and what they're doing wrong. yet they have no plan themselves. They offer no valid alternatives. It's all about tearing the other down without building something themselves. Now, when I think of the arguments against faith, it's kind of nice to know that there is no evidence, no proof that there is no God. There's no slam dunk smoking gun that Joseph Smith did not have the first vision, or that the Book of Mormon isn't true. Many have tried, but their arguments are opinions, theories, not proof. Now, you may already have experienced the most common retort to this step. When you ask them to give you evidence that there is no God, they will usually say, but you don't prove a negative. The burden of proof lies with the one asserting the existence of something. If you tell me there is a Santa Claus, then you need to prove to me he exists, rather than me prove to you that he doesn't. And they always think they're so clever. Again, let's go to Alma for help. This is our final step. Alma says, Korihor, I do have evidence. Let me tell you where my faith comes from. My testimony is based and founded on something. And we're going to really pause here and dig deep into this particular step. This is one of the most significant and faith-building steps in the entire chapter. Look at what Alma says in verse 41. But behold, I have all things as a testimony that these things are true. And ye also have all things as a testimony unto you that they are true. I'd call this final step for defending our faith, know why you know, or build a pyramid of faith. Alma knows where his testimony comes from. His faith is solid. He has a pyramid testimony. So let's go back to that symbol that we started this portion of the lesson with. It's going to help us to visualize the foundation of faith. At the top of our testimony, we're going to put the words, I know. That's the tip of our faith. But what is our I know founded on? What supports it? And for the longest time, I thought it was feelings, that it was emotions. I know the church is true because I feel it. But you know, feelings aren't always the most stable of things. I'm not discounting the importance of feelings in testimony. We know that the Spirit does communicate through our hearts and the way that we feel. But our faith has got to have a much stronger foundation than just that. It needs to be built on more. So, to help my students understand that foundation better, I always like to take them to Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1, because it contains my favorite definition of faith anywhere in the Scriptures. Paul tells us what faith is built on and uses two words to describe that foundation. Can you find them? He says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. I love those words. Faith is based on substance and evidence. And in the footnote, Joseph Smith adds the word assurance. Our testimonies are based on feelings, but also substance, evidence, and assurance. Now that stands in stark contrast to the type of witness that Korihor is going to demand. In verses 42 and 43, he demands a sign, an outward physical witness of God's existence and power. Doesn't want to have to work for his witness. Doesn't want growth. Doesn't want to plant a seed and nourish it and bring it up. He wants the whole tree right then and there without any effort. Just give me the spiritual knowledge I'm asking for. And Alma's going to respond to this demand with the witness that he's received. You want signs, Korihor? Here are the signs that have built my faith. Here is my evidence, my substance, my assurances. And in this, Alma is going to give us the bottom level of our pyramid. And this verse is just phenomenal. One of my favorite verses of all time, verse 44. But Alma said unto him, thou hast had signs enough. Will ye tempt your God? Will you say, show unto me a sign, when you have the testimony of all these thy brethren? This is substance and evidence number one. I would call this the evidence of experience. We believe because we and others have had actual experiences with divine things. I bet you anything that I could poll this audience right now and ask, how many of you have ever had some kind of experience with God? An answer to a prayer, a miracle, an outpouring of the Spirit. I bet you that every single one of you could share something of that nature, and probably even multiple experiences. We could compile all of those experiences into a book, have everybody write them down and publish it. It would be huge, as large as a set of encyclopedias, and you could slam that down in front of the skeptic and say, substance, evidence, the collective real-life experiences of so many. And then he says, and also all the holy prophets. Substance and evidence number 2. We'll call that evidence authority. We believe in certain things because others with authority, whom we trust, have told us so. I've never seen God or Jesus Christ physically, but I believe in the character and authority of those who say they have. I don't claim to receive direct revelation from God to lead a global church, but I believe in the authority of those who claim they do. We've got to look at their character, observe how they speak and live to determine whether we trust that authority. By their fruits ye shall know them. As far as the first presidency and the quorum of the 12 apostles are concerned, I sense the sincerity and power of those men. I trust their authority. If anybody were to know that the church were true or wasn't true, that it was all a farce, it would have to be them, right? How could you claim that kind of revelation from God in that position and not know if you were really receiving it? Do you get the sense that they're trying to deceive you? That they're putting on airs? I don't. The fact that they speak the way they do, live the way they do, lead the way they do, is a great pillar of my testimony. I believe in their authority. And we all, religious or non-religious, have to put our trust in some source of authority. I guess you have to believe in the authority of the scientist, or the engineer, or the politician, or the media personality. How often do those people turn out to be wrong? We've all got to put our trust somewhere. The fact that we have individuals to turn to with authority is substance and evidence of the things we believe. Next, the Scriptures are laid before thee. The Scriptures are their own kind of substance and evidence. They're tangible. They're real. You cannot explain their existence away. The Bible exists. The Book of Mormon exists. And you have to account for that existence somehow. What are the Scriptures filled with? Authority and experience. They're like a combination of the first two. The fact that these books exist and the amazing power and influence they have and have had on millions of people over the centuries is evidence and substance for our faith. They have a unique and innate power and spirit in them that you don't get in any other kind of book. They stand as powerful witnesses of divinity. No wonder we're encouraged to study them daily. They're faith fuel. Luckily for us as members of the Church of Jesus Christ, we've got 4 of them. And finally, Alma says, yea, and all things denote there is a God. Yea, even the earth, and all things that are upon the face of it. Yea, and its motion. Yea, and also all the planets which move in their regular form, do witness that there is a supreme Creator. I love this one. Let's call this the substance and evidence of reason. Common sense. Alma is appealing to Korihor's sense of reason there. Look around you. Look at the earth and everything on it, and the planets and the solar system as you look into the night sky. Can you really believe that you can have all that order and structure and matter, and it be the result of some accident, some chance creation, something that just appeared without cause or intelligence behind it? Our reason dictates against that. Just doesn't make any sense. There must be purpose. There must be design. There must be intelligence behind all of that beauty and order. That just makes sense in my mind, not just my heart, not just my feelings. And Alma's specific example in that really speaks to me. I feel the same way. I love being in the outdoors, in God's creations. And when I am, I can see and feel the hand of God in it. His divine fingerprints are all over the natural world. But this idea applies to other areas as well. The Book of Mormon. There are only two explanations for its existence. Either it was translated by the power and gift of God from ancient records, or Joseph Smith made it up and wrote it. Those are the options. My reason tells me that a backwoods farm boy from upstate New York with a third-grade education couldn't have written that book. That doesn't compute in my mind. With all of its literary and historical and religious significance and power, my reason doesn't allow me to believe that Joseph made it up. It's not a valid explanation, even for my scientific, logical part of my mind. My reason tells me there is a God. My reason tells me that the Book of Mormon is true. My sense of reason tells me that if there is a loving God out there, that he'd provide a means for his children to discover truth, a church to act as the source for that truth. My reason tells me that he would have a plan, that he would call prophets, that he would have a system of authority and order to operate under. Now that all stems from the logical part of my brain. That is substance. It's evidence. So do you see here, as people of faith, we do have a leg to stand on, a sturdy leg to stand, a firm foundation. And it is far stronger and deeper than feelings alone. That's why I feel that it's so important for all of us that when we say that we know, that we can also express and testify of how we know. Our truth, then, a bit more of a general statement here. When others seek to shake my faith, if I defend it like Alma did, it will stand firm. I just need to remember what he did here in Alma 30. Learn from it. Follow his example. Then I'm going to be far more prepared to withstand those attacks. I can face the skeptics, the antis, the mockers with confidence. Taking it to heart, have any of these steps ever helped you to fend off the faith shakers of your life? And how? And what evidence and substance has helped you to form the pyramid of your faith? My friends, I can't help but think that this is one of the most important lessons I've ever given on this channel. We live in a day of faith shaking. The prophesied spiritual earthquakes in diverse places in the last days are rumbling and rocking under our feet. We're surrounded by Korihor-like influence, and the faith of even the very elect is being challenged. So we must be actively engaged in shoring up our testimonies and building up our belief if we wish to endure the constant barrage of anti-faith, anti-religion, anti-tradition, and anti-Christ rhetoric that encircles us. But that being said, I also believe that there will come a day when all that we profess to be true will be beautifully and joyfully confirmed by God, not only to us, but to all of humanity. Our faith eventually will become perfect knowledge. But until then, let's remember Paul's statement, "The just shall live by faith." That was God's plan for our mortal experience from the very beginning. It is only faith that can create the spiritual growth, maturity, and divine development that can make us into beings like God. I suppose that God could very simply just reveal himself to the world right now and show and prove to all what the truth is. Just come down and explain it on the evening news. But why doesn't he do that? Because us gaining a certain level of knowledge is not really what he's after with mortality. He's after spiritual growth, experience, our divine progress. And that can only come by allowing us to experience a trial of faith. But that state is not intended to last forever. It's temporary. One day the test will end. and we will know. That knowledge is going to be all the sweeter because we will also know that we passed the test, that we built our own faith. Till that day, let's ignore the mocking of the faith shakers and those that stand in the great and spacious building. Trust in the wise traditions of our fathers. Recognize that obedience isn't bondage. Trust in the authority of those called by God. Reject the lies of the adversary and know and believe our doctrine. Build your pyramid of faith and know why you know. And then the core horrors of our lives can come, and we will be able to stand firm like the pyramids against the sands of time. Now, the rest of the story of Alma 30 is pretty straightforward. Korihor continues to demand a sign, and interestingly, God gives him one. But it's not a good one. Be careful what you wish for. You might just get it. He strikes him dumb, and eventually he's trampled underfoot by the Zoramites. And I find Alma's conclusion compelling. He says in verse 60, "And thus we see the end of him who perverteth the ways of the Lord. And thus we see that the devil will not support his children at the last day, but doth speedily drag them down to hell." Satan doesn't support his children. He cares nothing for those that follow him. No love lost there. He's a deadbeat dad. Why would we choose him? Makes no sense. Let's instead choose a better father. He's a little more strict. He does expect a lot out of us. But he loves us and will more than support us at the last day. He'll lift us up, purify us, and exalt us. We spent a lot of time on Alma chapter 30. This is such an amazing chapter. But I would like to point out a few things a little more briefly from Alma chapter 31. As an icebreaker, I might begin with this little activity. Display the following prayer and ask your class to identify what might be inappropriate about it. What's wrong with this prayer? Here's what I would display. My dear Savior, I am thankful that I am so popular and good-looking. I'm thankful that I'm not like all those wicked non-members. Please bless me that I will not have any problems or trials in my life. Please help me to win the lottery. Please forgive me for the things I'm going to do this weekend. In the name of the Holy Ghost, amen. In a classroom, this activity is usually going to produce a fair amount of discussion. I'm not going to go into all the reasons why this prayer is inappropriate, because I imagine it's fairly apparent, but I have found this to be a good way to start this particular lesson. And today we're going to look at another prayer that Alma identified as having some problems, the Zoramite prayer. The Zoramites were a group of apostate Nephites who identified themselves as religious people. And I think an effective way of approaching this lesson is to compare the Zoramite prayer and the way that it was performed with Alma's prayer, noting the differences between the two and determining which we feel is the better and more effective way of communicating with our Father in heaven. You can approach this as a handout to really help your students to look closely at the two prayers. Have them study with a marking pencil and point out the differences between the two. Then invite them to share their thoughts with each other and with the class. And here are a few things that stand out to me. I like to compare verse 14 with verse 26. The Zoramites prayed towards heaven, while Alma prayed to heaven. Interesting choice of words there. I'm not sure that's a coincidence. Perhaps that suggests that the Zoramite prayer was merely offered in the direction of heaven, but lacked an actual destination, only towards heaven. And that seems to make sense considering the fact that I don't feel that the Zoramites really intended their prayer to be heard by deity anyway. They really seem to be worshiping themselves rather than God. They are praying, as Jesus said, to be heard of men. And on the other hand, Alma's prayer actually obtains its destination. It proceeded to heaven, as opposed to just towards. And we know that it reaches its intended objective because his prayer is answered. Verse 36 tells us that they were filled with the Spirit, and verse 38 tells us that the Lord provided for them. Another difference, you see pride all over the Zoramite prayer. We believe that thou hast separated us from our brethren. We believe that thou hast elected us to be thy holy children. Thou hast elected us that we shall be saved, whilst all around us are elected to be cast by thy wrath down to hell. We thank thee, O God, that we are a chosen and a holy people. On the other hand, look at Alma's attitude. True, he does point out what he feels they're doing is wrong in his prayer. But this isn't done out of a spirit of condemnation, judgment, or pride. In verse 35, he says, Behold, O Lord, their souls are precious, and many of them are our brethren. Therefore, give unto us, O Lord, power and wisdom, that we may bring these, our brethren, again unto thee. Alma recognizes the worth of the Zoramite souls, as misguided as they are, and prays that he will have an ability to turn them from their self-worship to real worship. In verse 20, we learn that the Zoramites said this exact same prayer each week. It gives new meaning to the phrase vain repetitions. The Zoramites truly were vain in their repeated prayers. But in Alma's prayer, you sense the sincerity. This is not a memorized script. It's a conversation with God, dealing specifically with the matter at hand. It's present. Prayer is not intended to be rote, but real. We're speaking with an actual being with immeasurable power. Verse 23, we find that they never spoke again of their God, except this one time a week performance. And I'm going to have to pull in another verse here that wasn't part of the handout, but take a look at verse 10 in Alma 31, where it suggests that Alma continues in prayer and supplication to God daily. There are more differences in there, but that's going to suffice. I think the bigger issue at stake here is what the Zoramite prayers reveal about their character. Their prayers are an indicator of a deeper, more fundamental problem. They are a perfect illustration of a tactic that I feel the adversary uses to bring down religious people, where Korihor mounts a secular assault on truth. The Zoramites exemplify a religious one. They are a quote-unquote religious people. They have synagogues. They say prayers. They gather together once a week. They worship. So what's the problem? The problem is that they are hyper-focused on the ceremonial or outer performances of religion. Most churches have ritual or ceremonial type practices, including ours. But Satan has a way of taking everything good and twisting them for his purpose. And how could Satan take something like church worship, prayer, scripture study, or even temple attendance and make those things work for him? He tempts us to treat those things as ends in and of themselves rather than a means to an end. Of course, they're all good things, but if they're not turning us into beings more like God, then we've missed the point. Religion is more about becoming than it is about believing or even doing. The adversary wants us to over-formalize the religious practices and use them as a measuring stick with which to compare ourselves to and then condemn others. That's what happened with the Zoramites. They've used their worship as a means to lift themselves up, literally on the Rameumptom, above their brethren. We got to be careful not to fall into the same trap. We need to be careful not to get to the point where reading a certain amount of the scriptures a day becomes more important than applying their lessons into our daily actions, where going to church becomes more important than serving and developing charity, where saying our prayers becomes more important than actually connecting personally with deity. Granted, it's easier to follow the formal elements of religion than it is to actually forgive people, selflessly serve others, or develop faith, or live our religion. The Zoramites simply perform a weekly ritual, but find themselves no closer to God in the practice. Our truth: if my prayers are humble, sincere, and focused on the welfare of others, they will connect me with God and be answered. On the other hand, prideful prayer and worship will separate me from Him. Take it to heart. Just invite my students to ponder the nature of their prayers. Which of the two prayers are most like yours? And then what could we do to pray more like Alma? I hope that we can heed the warning of the Zoramite trap here. Rather than judge others, we can view their souls as precious. Rather than check off the boxes of religious practice, we can perform these things with meaning and intention. Rather than just doing churchy stuff, we can become beings like God and Christ. Alma shows us the heart and soul of worship. I really like the origin of the word religion. To religar something means to reconnect. Religion is about reconnecting with God, with the divine, with our fellow man even. And where the Zoramites are separating themselves from their brethren, and they're only praying towards heaven, Alma truly connects with both. It's my prayer that our religious practices will reconnect us with heaven and each other, rather than driving us apart. That will conclude our lesson for this week, my friends. Thank you for spending this time with me. I'm always so grateful that I get the chance to share my love of the Scriptures with you every week. If you feel like this lesson helped in some way, I just ask that you look for an opportunity to share it with somebody else that you feel it could help. Now, thank you so much for watching. Get out there and teach with